The moon does not mourn, it only watches. Kira stood at the edge of the collapsed stone wall, her breath visible in the frozen air, her hand pressed against the swell of her belly beneath the tattered wool cloak. The ruins of the northern temple had been her sanctuary for 3 months now, long enough to learn which stones held warmth from the sun, which corners shielded her from the wind, and which shadows hid her from the patrols that sometimes passed below the ridge. She had not expected to survive the rejection. She had not expected to carry life after it. The night her mate, her husband, her alpha, had spoken the words still burned in her memory like frostbite that never healed. "You are not enough, Kira. This pack needs strength, not softness." He had turned his back on her in front of the entire council, his voice cold and final. "I, Garen of the Iron Peak clan, reject you as my mate and Luna." The bond had shattered like ice under a boot. She had felt it crack through her chest, felt the tether between their souls snap and recoil, leaving her gasping on the stone floor. No one had helped her rise. No one had spoken her name. They had expected her to leave, to vanish into the wilderness and die quietly, as rejected Omegas often did. But Kira had not died. She had walked for days, bleeding and broken, until she found these ruins, an ancient temple dedicated to the moon goddess, half buried in snow and time. The roof had caved in centuries ago, but the inner sanctum still stood, its walls thick enough to block the wind. She had made a home in the bones of worship, and then, 2 months later, she had felt the flutter. Life, small and stubborn and impossible. She pressed her hand harder against her belly now, feeling the faint movement beneath her palm. The child was not supposed to exist. Rejected bonds did not bear fruit. The goddess herself had always ensured it. Yet here it was, growing inside her, a secret wrapped in flesh and defiance. Kira did not know if it was a miracle or a curse. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke and iron. Her body went rigid. She knew that scent, blood and steel, the smell of wolves who had seen battle. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the tree line below the ridge. Movement. 3 figures, no, 4, moving through the snow with the deliberate slowness of the wounded. Her instinct screamed at her to hide, to retreat into the deepest chamber of the ruins and stay silent. But something else stirred in her chest, a pull she did not understand, sharp and insistent, like a hook lodged beneath her ribs. One of the figures stumbled. The others caught him, dragging him forward. Even from this distance, Kira could see the dark stains spreading across the snow in their wake. They were dying. She should let them. She owed the world nothing. The world had given her nothing but pain. But her feet moved before her mind could stop them. Kira reached them as the largest one collapsed. He fell hard, his knees striking stone beneath the snow, his breath ragged and wet. The others, 2 younger wolves, barely more than boys, looked at her with wild, desperate eyes. "Please!" one of them gasped. "Please! He's dying!" Kira's gaze dropped to the fallen man. He was massive, even on his knees, broad-shouldered, his dark hair matted with blood and snow, his face half hidden by the shadow of exhaustion. But it was his scent that stopped her breath. Pine and smoke and something ancient. Something that made her wolf stir for the first time since the rejection. Alpha, not just any alpha, a king. She could feel it in the weight of his presence, even broken as he was. The air around him bent with authority, with power that had been carved into him through blood and duty. What happened? She heard herself ask. Ambush, the younger wolf rasped. Rogues, 30 of them. They were waiting at the pass. We lost everyone else. The king's head lifted slowly. His eyes found hers, silver, pale as winter dawn, rimmed with exhaustion and something deeper. Pain that was not just physical. You. His voice was a low rasp, barely human. You're alone. It was not a question. It was recognition. Kira's jaw tightened. So are you. His gaze held hers for a long moment, and she felt that pull again, sharp, undeniable, wrong. She was broken. He was dying. There should be nothing between them but necessity. But the moon was watching. Can you walk? She asked, her voice flat. No, one of the boys answered for him. He took a blade to the ribs, silver-laced. Silver. Kira's stomach twisted. Silver poisoning was slow and agonizing for their kind. It burned through the blood, eating away at the ability to heal. She should walk away. She should let the goddess decide. Instead, she stepped forward and slid her shoulder beneath the king's arm. The temple is close, she said quietly. If you can make it there, I can try to help. The king's weight settled against her, heavy and warm despite the cold. He smelled like blood and battle, but beneath it, beneath the violence, there was something else. Something that made her wolf whimper softly in the back of her mind. Why? He murmured, his breath hot against her ear. Kira did not answer. She did not know. They moved in silence, the two boys supporting the king from the other side, their footsteps crunching through snow and ash. The ruins loomed ahead, dark and skeletal against the pale sky. When they finally reached the inner sanctum, Kira lowered the king onto the pile of furs she had collected over the months. He collapsed with a low groan, his eyes sliding shut. Water, she said to the boys. There's a stream 50 paces east. Bring as much as you can carry. They obeyed without question, disappearing into the snow. Kira knelt beside the king, her hands already moving to peel back the blood-soaked fabric of his tunic. The wound was deep, a jagged tear beneath his ribs, the edges blackened with silver corruption. She had seen wounds like this before. Most did not survive them. But her hands were steady as she worked. As she cleaned the wound with melted snow and pressed strips of cloth against the bleeding. She did not know why she was doing this. She did not know why it mattered. The king's eyes opened again, silver and unfocused. You're with child, he whispered. Kira froze, her hand stilled against his ribs. How? I can smell it. His voice was faint, but certain. The scent. It's old. 3 months, maybe more. Her throat tightened. No one was supposed to know. No one was supposed to see. It's none of your concern, she said, her voice cold. You were rejected. It was not a question. It was a statement, soft and sure, and it cut deeper than any blade. Kira's hands trembled. Yes? The king's gaze held hers, and for a moment, she saw something shift in those silver eyes, recognition, or perhaps understanding. So was I, he whispered. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and true. And in the silence that followed, the moon rose higher, casting pale light through the broken roof of the temple. The boys returned with water, their faces pale and anxious. Kira worked through the night, cleaning the wound, wrapping the king's torso in strips of linen she had salvaged from the temple's old prayer cloths. The silver had sunk deep, but it had not reached his heart. Not yet. By dawn, his fever broke. Kira sat beside him, her back against the cold stone wall, exhaustion pulling at her bones. The boys had fallen asleep near the entrance, huddled together for warmth. The fire she had built crackled softly, casting shadows that danced across the king's face. He was handsome, she realized, scarred and rough, but carved with a kind of tragic beauty. There was a crescent-shaped mark on his jaw, pale against his tanned skin, and his hands were calloused and strong even in sleep. "You should rest," his voice came, low and rough. Kira startled. His eyes were open, watching her. "You're awake." "Barely." He shifted slightly, wincing. "You saved my life." "I stopped the bleeding. The goddess will decide the rest." "The goddess." He exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting to the broken roof above them, where stars still glittered faintly in the pre-dawn sky. "I stopped believing in her mercy a long time ago." Kira said nothing. She understood that disbelief. She had felt it herself every night since the rejection. "What's your name?" he asked. "Kira." "Kira." He repeated it softly, as if testing the weight of it. "I'm Theron. I know who you are." Everyone knew the name of the Northern King, the Alpha who had united 5 clans under one banner, who had held the Northern Territories against rogue incursions for a decade. "You're far from your kingdom." "I was hunting the ones who killed my family." The words were simple, but they carried an ocean of grief. Kira's breath caught. "Your family?" "My mate, my daughter." His voice was flat, emotionless in the way that only the truly broken could manage. "Rogues burned our home 6 months ago. I was away, negotiating a treaty. When I returned..." He closed his eyes. There was nothing left but ash. Kira felt something crack inside her chest, not her own pain, but his, reflecting back at her like a mirror. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "So am I." He opened his eyes again, and this time they were filled with something raw and terrible. "I should have been there. I should have protected them." "You can't blame yourself for..." "I can." His voice was sharp, final. "I am their king, their protector, and I failed." Silence settled between them, heavy and aching. After a long moment, Theron's gaze dropped to her belly, barely visible beneath the cloak. "Your mate," he said quietly. "He rejected you while you carried his child." Kira's jaw tightened. "He didn't know. Neither did I. The bond broke before." She trailed off, unwilling to finish the sentence. "Then he's a fool." The words were so unexpected, so simple, that Kira almost laughed, but the sound died in her throat. "He said I was weak," she said instead, her voice barely audible. "That an Omega couldn't lead beside him, that I would make the pack soft." Theron's expression darkened. "Strength is not cruelty, and any Alpha who cannot see the power in compassion does not deserve to lead." Kira looked at him then, really looked at him. At the grief carved into his face, at the guilt that shadowed his eyes, at the way he spoke of mercy, even while drowning in his own pain. "You're different," she said softly. "I'm broken," he corrected. "There's a difference." Maybe broken is the only way to see clearly. His gaze held hers, and for a moment something passed between them. Understanding, recognition, the quiet acknowledgement of 2 people who had been shattered by the same world. Outside, the wind howled softly through the ruins. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. 3 days passed in the ruins. Theron's wound began to heal, though slowly. The silver had done its damage, and even with Kira's careful tending, the poison lingered in his blood like a ghost. He could sit now, could move without collapsing, but the strength that had once defined him was still distant. Kira watched him carefully, noting the way he pushed himself too hard, the way he refused to show weakness in front of the boys. They looked at him with reverence, Kale and Finn, both barely 18, both orphaned by the same ambush that had nearly killed their king. She understood their loyalty. Theron carried himself like a man who had been forged in fire and loss, and even broken, he commanded respect. But it was the quiet moments that unsettled her. The way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. The way his gaze lingered on her belly, on the small movements she made to protect the life growing inside her. The way he listened when she spoke, as if her words carried weight. No one had looked at her like that since the rejection. On the 4th morning, Kira woke to find him standing at the edge of the ruins, his back to her, his shoulders tense. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting pale gold across the snow. She approached slowly, her footsteps crunching softly. "You shouldn't be up," she said. "I've been still too long." His voice was rough, tired. "I need to move. You'll tear the wound open. Then I'll bleed." He turned to look at her, and his expression was hard, haunted. "I can't stay here forever, Kira. My kingdom is fractured. The clans are barely holding together. If I don't return soon, you'll die before you reach the border." His jaw clenched. "Then I die. Why?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "Why throw your life away?" "Because it's all I have left." His voice cracked, just slightly. "My family is gone. My mate is gone. I have nothing but duty, and if I can't even fulfill that—" "Then you're running," Kira interrupted, her voice cold. "You're running from your grief, and you're calling it duty." Theron stared at her, his silver eyes wide with shock. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" She stepped closer, her own pain rising to meet his. "I lost everything too, Theron. My mate, my pack, my home. I was cast out to die, and I survived anyway. And every day I wake up and wonder why. Why the goddess let me live when she took everything else." Her voice broke, and she hated herself for it. "But I don't run," she continued, quieter now. "I don't call my survival duty. I call it what it is, grief, and I carry it. Because that's what the broken do. We carry what we can't fix." Theron's expression softened, the hardness melting into something raw and vulnerable. "I don't know how to carry it," he admitted. "I don't know how to live in a world where they're not in it." "Neither do I." Kira's hand moved instinctively to her belly. "But I have to try. For this. For the life that shouldn't exist, but does anyway." Theron's gaze followed her hand, and something shifted in his eyes. Something like wonder, or perhaps longing. "You're stronger than you know," he said softly. "So are you," she replied. "You just don't want to be." They stood in silence, the wind cold against their faces, the ruins ancient and patient around them. And then, without thinking, Theron reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm, solid, real. Kira's breath caught. She should pull away. She should remember that bonds were dangerous, that trust was a luxury she could not afford. But she didn't move. "Stay," she whispered. "Just a few more days, until you're strong enough to survive the journey." Theron looked down at their joined hands, and for the first time since she had found him bleeding in the snow, he smiled. It was small, broken, but real. "A few more days," he agreed. The gift revealed itself on the 7th night. Kira woke to the sound of whimpering. She sat up quickly, her heart pounding, and saw Theron thrashing in his sleep, his face twisted in anguish. Sweat glistened on his skin despite the cold, and his breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. A nightmare. She moved to his side, hesitating for only a moment before placing her hand on his chest. The moment her palm made contact, light burst from her fingertips. Silver light, soft and cool, spreading across his skin like water. Theron gasped, his eyes flying open, but the light did not stop. It poured from her hand, sinking into his chest, wrapping around the wound beneath his ribs. Kira tried to pull back, panic flooding her veins, but her hand was locked in place, held by some force she did not understand. What is this?" she breathed. Theron stared up at her, his silver eyes wide with shock, and something else. Recognition. "You're a pathfinder," he whispered. The word meant nothing to her. "A what?" "A healer, a guide." His voice was filled with awe. The goddess marks some omegas with the ability to see wounds that others cannot, to heal not just the body, but the soul. The light began to fade, and Kira's hand finally came free. She stumbled back, her breathing uneven, her mind racing. "That's not possible. I'm nothing. "You're everything," Theron interrupted, sitting up slowly. His hand moved to his ribs, where the wound had been. The skin was whole, smooth, the silver corruption gone. "You just saved me. Again." Kira shook her head, denial rising in her throat. "I don't have gifts. I'm just an omega, a rejected omega. The goddess marks those who have been broken," Theron said softly, "because only the broken understand what needs healing." His words hung in the air, and Kira felt something shift inside her, something that had been dormant, sleeping beneath the weight of her rejection. Power. Not loud or violent, but quiet and steady. A power that had been there all along, waiting to be seen. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Neither do I." Theron stood slowly, his movements fluid and strong for the first time since she had found him. He looked at her with something like reverence. "But I know this. You were meant to survive, Kira. You were meant to be here." Tears burned in her eyes, and she hated them. "I don't want this," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't want to be special. I just want to be left alone." "I know." Theron stepped closer, his presence warm and steady. "But the goddess doesn't ask permission. She only asks that we carry what we're given." Kira looked up at him, at the man who had been a stranger a week ago, who had become something else in the space between survival and trust. "What if I can't?" she asked. "Then I'll help you carry it," he said simply. And in that moment, beneath the broken roof of the temple, with the moon watching through the cracks, Kira felt something she had not felt since the rejection. Hope. The rogues came on the 9th day. Kira heard them before she saw them, the crunch of boots on snow, the low growls of wolves who had forgotten their humanity. She woke Theron with a hand on his shoulder, her heart pounding. "They found us," she whispered. Theron was on his feet in seconds, his body tense and ready despite the healing that was still incomplete. Cale and Finn scrambled awake, fear bright in their eyes. "How many?" Theron asked, his voice low and controlled. "At least 10, Kira said, her senses sharpening. Maybe more." Theron's jaw tightened. "They must have tracked us from the ambush. They want to finish what they started." "We can't fight them," Finn said, his voice shaking. "We barely survived last time. We don't have to fight them." Theron's gaze shifted to Kira. "We run." "Where?" Cale asked. "There's nothing but wilderness for miles." "The old pass," Kira said suddenly. 3 miles north. It's narrow. They'll have to come at us one at a time." Theron nodded. "Then we move. Now." They gathered what little they had, furs, weapons, the last of their supplies, and slipped out through the back of the ruins. The snow was deep, slowing their movements. But Kira led them with a certainty she did not understand. Her instincts guided her, sharp and clear, as if the land itself was showing her the way. Behind them, the rogues howled. They moved faster, Theron and the boys keeping pace despite their exhaustion. Kira's breath came in sharp gasps, her hand pressed against her belly, silently willing the child inside her to hold on. The pass appeared ahead, a narrow gap between 2 towering cliffs, barely wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. "There," Kira gasped. "We can defend it." Theron nodded, positioning Cale and Finn at the entrance. He turned to Kira, his expression fierce. "Stay behind us. No matter what happens, you stay safe." "I'm not helpless," she shot back. "I know." His hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing against her cheek. "But you're carrying the future, and I won't let them take that from you." Before she could respond, the rogues emerged from the trees. There were 12 of them, ragged, wild-eyed, their humanity stripped away by years of violence and exile. They moved like predators, circling the entrance to the pass, their growls low and hungry. The largest one stepped forward, his scarred face twisted into a grin. "The Northern King," he said, his voice mocking. "Still alive. How disappointing." Theron's expression was cold, lethal. "Leave now, and I'll let you live." The rogue laughed. "You're in no position to make threats, Your Majesty. You're wounded, outnumbered, and far from home." "Then you don't know me very well." Theron moved. He was fast, faster than Kira had expected, his body a blur of motion as he met the first rogue head-on. The clash was brutal, bone and claw and blood, and Cale and Finn fought beside him, desperate and determined. But the rogues kept coming. Kira watched from the narrow passage, her heart in her throat, her hands trembling. Theron was holding them back, but barely. Blood stained the snow, his and theirs, and she knew that they would not survive this, unless... Her hand moved to her belly, and she felt the warmth there, the light that had healed Theron, the gift she did not understand. She stepped forward. "Kira, no!" Theron shouted, but she was already moving. She raised her hands, and the light came. It poured from her palms, silver and blinding, spreading across the snow like dawn, breaking over darkness. The rogues screamed, stumbling back, their eyes wide with terror. And in that light, Kira saw them, not as monsters, but as broken men. Men who had been cast out, rejected, left to rot in the wilderness. Men like her. "Stop," she said, her voice ringing with power she did not know she possessed. "You don't have to be this. You don't have to die like this." The lead rogue stared at her, his scarred face twisted with confusion and rage. "What are you?" he rasped. "I'm someone who understands. Kira said softly. I was rejected too. I was left to die, but I chose to survive. And so can you. The light pulsed, warm and gentle, and for a moment the rogues hesitated. And then, slowly, the lead rogue lowered his head. We don't deserve mercy, he whispered. No one does, Kira replied, but the goddess gives it anyway. One by one, the rogues turned and disappeared into the trees. When the last one was gone, Kira collapsed. Theron caught her before she hit the ground, his arms strong and sure around her. You're insane, he murmured, but his voice was filled with wonder. Maybe, Kira whispered, exhausted. But it worked. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. They did not return to the ruins. Instead, Theron led them deeper north, toward the territory he had once ruled. The journey took 3 days, slow and cautious, but the rogues did not return. It was as if Kira's light had carved a safe passage through the wilderness, a protection that lingered in the air around them. On the 3rd evening, they reached the outer edges of the northern kingdom. The land was scarred, burned villages, empty homes, the remnants of a war that had never truly ended. But there were survivors. Small groups of wolves who had held on, who had waited for their king to return. When they saw Theron, they fell to their knees. Your Majesty, an older woman whispered, tears streaming down her face. We thought you were dead. Theron's expression was pained. I should have been. But you're not, the woman said, her gaze shifting to Kira. And you brought someone with you. Kira stood behind Theron, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. She could feel the eyes of the pack on her, curious, wary, judging. This is Kira, Theron said, his voice firm. She saved my life. She is under my protection. The woman's gaze softened. Then she is welcome here. Over the following days, Theron worked to rebuild what had been broken. He reunited scattered families, repaired damaged homes, and began the slow process of healing his fractured kingdom. And through it all, Kira watched. She saw the way he led, not with cruelty or dominance, but with compassion. He listened to his people, heard their pain, and carried their burdens as if they were his own. He was the kind of alpha her former mate had never been. And slowly, against every instinct that told her to guard her heart, Kira began to feel something she thought had died with her rejection. Trust. One evening, as the sun set over the northern mountains, Theron found her sitting alone near the edge of the camp. You're quiet, he said, settling beside her. I'm always quiet. Not like this. He studied her face, his silver eyes searching. What's wrong? Kira hesitated, her hand moving to her belly. The child was growing stronger now, its movements more frequent. She could feel it shifting, restless and alive. I don't belong here, she said finally. These people, they're your pack, your family. I'm just... You're the woman who saved my life, Theron interrupted gently. You're the woman who showed mercy to rogues when any other would have let them die. You're the woman carrying a child that shouldn't exist and surviving anyway. He reached out, taking her hand in his. You belong here, Kira, more than you know. Tears stung her eyes. I don't know how to believe that. Then let me believe it for you, until you're ready. His words settled over her like a blanket, warm and safe. Theron, she whispered, what are we doing? I don't know, he admitted, but I know I don't want to stop. Kira looked at him then, really looked at him, at the man who had been broken by loss, who had rebuilt himself through duty and grief, who had chosen compassion even when the world demanded cruelty. And she realized, with a clarity that stole her breath, that she was falling in love with him. "I'm afraid," she confessed. "So am I." He lifted her hand, pressing it against his chest, where his heart beat steady and strong. "But maybe fear is just proof that we still have something worth protecting." Kira closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his skin, the rhythm of his pulse. And for the first time since the rejection, she let herself hope that love could be more than pain. The confrontation came on a cold morning, when the snow fell soft and silent. Garen arrived at the northern border with 20 warriors, his expression hard and unyielding. Word had spread that the rejected Omega had been seen with the Northern King, and he had come to reclaim what he believed was his. Theron met him at the edge of the camp, his posture calm but unmistakably lethal. "You're not welcome here," Theron said, his voice cold. Garen's gaze swept past him, searching. "I'm not here for you. I'm here for my mate." "She's not your mate." Theron's tone was ice. "You rejected her. You cast her out to die." "A mistake," Garen said, though his voice lacked conviction. "One I intend to correct." "You don't get to correct that kind of mistake." Theron stepped forward, and the air around him seemed to darken with barely contained fury. "You had your chance, and you chose cruelty. Now she's under my protection, and if you take one step toward her, I will end you." Garen's expression twisted with anger. "She's carrying my child." "No," Kira's voice rang out, clear and strong. She stepped into view, her hand resting on her belly, her chin lifted with quiet defiance. Garen's eyes widened at the sight of her, at the swell of her pregnancy, at the strength in her gaze. "This child is not yours," she continued. "You rejected me before I knew it existed. You broke our bond. You have no claim." "Kira." "No." She shook her head, her voice steady. "You don't get to speak my name. You don't get to pretend you care. You wanted me gone and I went, and I survived without you." Garen's jaw clenched. "You think he'll keep you? A rejected Omega with another Alpha's child?" "She doesn't need me to keep her," Theron said quietly. "She's not a possession. She's a person. And she's stronger than you will ever understand." Garen's gaze shifted between them, and Kira saw the moment he realized he had lost, not just her, but any power he thought he held. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and threatening. "Yes, it is." Kira's voice was soft but final. "Go home, Garen. Find someone who wants what you have to offer, because I never will again." Garen stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. And then, without another word, he turned and left. Kira watched him go, her heart pounding, her hands trembling. When he was finally out of sight, she turned to Theron. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't need me," he said, his eyes filled with pride. "You handled that yourself." "I know." She smiled, small but real. But it was nice not to be alone. Theron reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You'll never be alone again," he promised. "Not if I have anything to say about it." And in that moment, beneath the falling snow, Kira believed him. Spring came slowly to the north. The snow melted, revealing green shoots and wildflowers that had been buried beneath the ice. The pack rebuilt, stronger and more unified than before. And Kira, heavy with child, moved through the camp with a quiet grace that commanded respect. She was no longer the rejected Omega hiding in ruins. She was the pathfinder, the healer, the woman who had shown mercy to rogues and stood against her former mate without flinching, and she was loved. Theron had not spoken the words aloud, not yet, but Kira felt them in every glance, every touch, every moment they spent together. He was patient, careful, giving her the time she needed to heal from wounds that went deeper than flesh. But on the night her child was born, everything changed. The labor was long and difficult, and Kira clung to Theron's hand through every contraction, every wave of pain. The midwives worked quickly, their voices calm and steady, and when the baby finally emerged, small and squalling and impossibly alive, Kira wept. "A girl," the midwife said, smiling, "healthy and strong." Kira held her daughter against her chest, feeling the warmth of her skin, the rapid beat of her tiny heart. The child had dark hair and silver eyes, eyes that looked nothing like Garen's, eyes that looked like Theron's. Kira's breath caught, and she looked up at Theron, who stood beside her, his expression filled with wonder and something that looked like disbelief. "How?" he started, but Kira shook her head. "The bond," she whispered. "It broke before she was conceived. But you," her voice cracked, "you were the one who healed me. You were the one who loved you," Theron finished softly, "even before I understood what that meant." Tears streamed down Kira's face. "She's yours, Theron. The goddess gave her to us." Theron knelt beside the bed, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch the baby's tiny fingers. The child grasped his finger instinctively, and Theron's breath shuddered. "What do we name her?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Kira looked down at her daughter, at the miracle that should not have been possible, and smiled. "Luna," she said softly, "after the goddess who never abandoned us." Theron leaned forward, pressing his forehead against Kira's, his hand still entwined with their daughter's. "I love you," he whispered. "I should have said it sooner, but—" "I know," Kira interrupted, her voice filled with certainty. "I've known since the ruins." "Will you stay?" he asked. "Will you be my Luna, not because of duty, but because you choose it?" Kira looked at him, at the man who had been broken by loss, who had chosen mercy over vengeance, who had loved her even when she could not love herself. "Yes," she said, her voice steady, "I choose you. I choose us." And as the first light of dawn broke over the northern mountains, Kira felt something she had not felt since the rejection. Wholeness, not because she had been healed by another, but because she had healed herself, and in doing so, had found a love that was not recompense for suffering, but a gift freely given. The moon watched, silent and eternal, as the broken became whole. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.